Hi there, and welcome to Ancestral Recall. I'm your host, Eli Kaplan. This is a web series that explores and explains 20 years of Magic's history. Today we're going to be looking at the first set that explored and defined tribal mechanics, Onslaught. Why listen to my stories? Because my stories are best stories.
Overview.
Onslaught is the beginning of the last block before we enter the modern era ushered in by Mirrodin. Now released in fall 2002, Onslaught was a bold and entertaining experiment, the first of Magic's tribal blocks. Onslaught was an experiment in modular design. Much of the set was designed to interact with the many other creatures that have been printed throughout Magic's history. But since there had already been a ton of elves and goblins printed, Wizards tried to keep them from getting out of hand by not printing them in Odyssey block, which was a serious continuity goof in Onslaught because they just came out of the woodwork with no creative justification. Onslaught focused on 8 key tribes. The Aven were in blue and white. Guess what mechanic they all had? White also got soldiers, which were efficient, aggressive little guys. When it comes to theological troopers, clerics, they found homes in both black and white. Clerics had a number of abilities such as protection and coming back to the dead as zombies. Also, sacrificing other clerics to drain life. Ugh. I guess we're talking Temple of Doom clerics as well as the Garden Variety D&D types. Blue got wizards. The wizards did all sorts of tricky little effects, but were total pushovers in a fight. Blue also got to use its illusions, which were able to temporarily shift into other forms to add tribal benefits. Black got zombies, who got a little support in Odyssey block. But before Onslaught, zombies had less tribal synergies than goblins or elves. They were probably the 4th place tribe supported behind goblins, elves, and merfolk. During this set, merfolk were on the outs with wizards. Something about legs and breathing on land, or maybe there were too many direct-to-DVD Little Mermaid sequels. I don't know. Red and green got a ton of beasts. The biggest tribe in terms of power and toughness, obviously. Morph was a very efficient way of getting really big guys into play on the installment plan for beasts. Goblins went into red as per usual with just a touch of black. This precedent was enough to prompt Lorwyn's color pairing. Green also got its niche tribe, elves. A lot of cards from Legacy's 2 tribal decks come from Onslaught block. Let's profile each tribe's best common to show off what each tribe is really about in Limited. For the Aven, the best representative is Gust Cloak Harrier, who is sneaky enough to get out of dangerous attacks, and it's a 2/2 flyer. Onslaught was the first set to print a lot of mana-efficient flyers and whites. The Harrier is also the best soldier of the set, sadly. Glory Seeker is a very mana-efficient creature for the soldiers, but doesn't have a lot of synergy. The soldier card you usually wanted to draft was an uncommon, Catapult Squad, who made combat a nightmare for opponents. The best common cleric was Battlefield Medic, who could work in concert with others to prevent lots of damage. This guy would never see printed common today because he requires constant board checking to count clerics, as well as throw off opponents' combat math. The common zombie that most players loved drafting was Shepherd of Rot, a 2-mana zombie that did damage to all players for each zombie in play. Coupled with evasive partners like Severed Legion, a creepy army of zombified hands, zombies were one of the most popular archetypes. The illusion that always went early in draft was Misformed Dreamer, who was an efficient 2/1 flyer for 3. Another was Misformed Wall, a fine defensive creature that could easily shift into other creature types for activated abilities. These were the grease in Onslaught block's tribal engine, similar to Lorwyn block's changelings. I hate to say it, but the strength of Onslaught's wizards were at the uncommon and rare spots. There simply were no great wizards at common. Later sets changed this, however. Beasts had quite a few choices for first picks. It was a strong tribe. Barkhide Mauler's 4/4 body stats were quite efficient for 5 mana at the time, and it also had cycling. Kroskin Tusker, wow, 6/5 for 7 mana, really big. It was expensive to play, but the land cycling +1 card kept it a very early pick. It was never a dead card. The other 2 solid beasts at common were Morphs. Snarling Underrat could use mana to make any beast hit harder, and Spinning Gorna could unmorph in a pinch to block enemy flyers. The most popular elf card was Well-Wisher. With multiples of these and other elvish colleagues, players in Limited could routinely gain 8 or 10 life a turn, and that happened all the time. Wow, this card was strong. It bought players so much time to draw their bombs. There's no doubt as to what's the best common goblin. It's been universally acclaimed as the best common of Onslaught, hands down, of any tribe. Sparksmith did some damage to you, sure, but it was able to constantly kill off morphs and other small creatures in a set where half the creatures had power 2 or less. There wasn't even a mana cost. Sparksmith did take some restraint to use efficiently, but it was the sickest goblin at common, which meant you saw it in limited all the time. So many Sparksmiths. This is what I think made the format either really fun or really miserable, depending on what side the Sparksmith fought. Wizards also seeded a few dragon cards to get ready for Scourge, the dragonest of dragony sets. Aside from a whole load of tribal mechanics, Onslaught had 2 major mechanical themes. One was old, cycling. Unlike the cycling cards of Urza's Block, which were all costed at 2 mana to cycle, Onslaught had a host of new costs. There were also cards that came with an additional effect when cycled, such as Renewed Faith, Complicate, or Slice and Dice. One of Magic's most dominant standard decks, the Astral Slide deck, came directly from Onslaught. This block monster kept enemies off the table with Astral Slide while using Lightning Rift, a cheap enchantment, to aim damage at the head. Once the opponent had extended enough, you could wipe their board with Wrath of God or Slice and Dice. Reprinting Cycling was the first time Wizards had brought back an expert-level mechanic. Some were ticked off by it, but it was a very useful mechanic that helped the set flow. You really needed synergy to get Onslaught limited decks to sing, and Cycling let players get at their best tools in a timely fashion. A lot of players complained though, since there were a lot of bomb rares. The other major mechanic of the set was Morph. Now for 3 mana of any color, you get to play a Morph card face down. And while it's on the table face down, it's a 2/2 colorless creature with no creature type, and you can turn it up as a state-based effect at any time by paying the mana cost. While Legions and Scourge later on put triggered effects onto the stack when creatures unmorphed, Onslaught kept it relatively simple by limiting most of its sneaky triggers, to just power toughness shifts and triggered abilities that happened when the creature dealt damage to the opponent. Morph is one of my favorite limited mechanics of all time because it involves games within games. It allowed players to reliably draft lots of creatures, even morphs that were off color. If opponents knew you were running a blatantly powerful morph card like Exalted Angel, they'd often try to take it down when there was a window of opportunity. Bluffing them by playing a bad morph and then attacking with it to simulate the value of another, more valuable one, that's an important tactic in this block. Onslaught block is the bluffer's paradise. The bluffs were harder, though, when the potential selection went up with later sets. There were so many other creatures that it could be at that point. The expansion symbol for this set comes from a representation of a morph. Now, when I was playing, I don't ever remember seeing any of them in the card arts. In fact, the first morph I actually remember noticing was in the art of Time Spiral's Ixidron. Then they had an Arcana on the mothership that pointed out the background bits in Ascending Aven. Yeah, that's the only card with morph in the set that actually visually represents what a morph is. Also, generally speaking, unless you're a linguist like I am, morph is a verb, not a noun. There were also some major shifts to the color pie. The most famous of these is the iconic Disenchant staple, which had nestled in white for many years, and now with Onslaught, it had a new home in green. Story! Let's start off with the novel. When last we left Oteria, Kamal had renounced the Mirari's power and stuck it into the middle of the Crowsum Forest. He chills out there for a while. Kamal's sister, Jessica, is transformed by the Cabal into Phage the Untouchable, a horrid warrior who slays anything she touches, and she is very touchy-feely. Also, the book introduces Ixidor, an illusionist who creates a dream world filled with his illusions made solid through mud. That's the story conceit for the morph mechanic, and yet there are lots of morphs which are clearly aligned with pre-existing Otarian factions. That doesn't make sense. But anyway, Ixidor has a dream at night where he creates Akroma, the Angel of Wrath. Akroma, his champion, fights off Ixidor's enemies and uses her preternatural charisma to win over legions and command them. The different factions find ways to recruit giant armies, and there are massive battles. It's J. Robert King writing, and in all honesty, he's pretty terrible, and it's all intricate details of mighty thewed warriors hewing their ways through armies for days. Totally tedious, totally unbelievable, and utterly skippable. The story as seen on the cards is pretty straightforward, with different factions fighting each other. Famous cards! We're going to start off today with 2 cycles. The biggest reason you want to open an Onslaught booster is to open the fetch lands. These original fetch lands, almost a decade before Zendikars, let you search for allied colored lands. And at the time, that meant basics, or the original dual lands from Alpha. Ravnica's shock lands hadn't been printed yet. But the fetch lands turned Brainstorm into a sick draw engine in Vintage. If there's any cards in your deck that interact with the top card of your library, fetch lands get even more use out of them. The fetch lands were an immediate hit. They immediately hit $15 as soon as they got released, and their prices went up over time. Wizards has suggested that we may see fetch lands within a few years, though with the advent of supplementary products only legal in older formats such as Conspiracy, they may not enter Standard, and that's okay with me. Another famous cycle from Onslaught was the Pit Fighters. These expensive legends hit hard on the board, except for that wussy Jareth, who can block anything, even a Leviathan or Autochthonic Worm. Big deal. He swings for 4. Kamal, Fist of Krosa, doesn't count, because while his activated ability is amazing, his stats are too small. Arcanist the Omnipotent lets you play my favorite spell for free every turn, and if someone tries to get rid of him, he just dodges back to your hand. Red's Rorik's Bladewing was just as badass in combat as the Spirit of the Night, and cost 3 mana less. Sylvos Rogue Elemental had a very cheap mana cost, and just would not stop. This guy made Force of Nature look like a wimp. But the most famous of this cycle is Vizara the Dreadful, Magic's first legendary Gorgon. She had flying, swung for 5, or killed an enemy creature. She didn't care if it was black either. Whew, that's power. Urban legend tells of Gary Wise, one of Magic's pros at the top of the game, playing at a pre-release. He was extremely vexed because his opponent, a young kid, was annihilating his board with Vizara. He finally found a way to send enough attackers at it, have the Gorgon block and take 3 damage, and then aimed shock at it with a flourish. Unfortunately, Wise was tilted so much that he wasn't paying attention to his opponent. Who was it 2 life? Oops. We're going to cut this show off here, folks. Next week, we're going to finish Onslaught by looking more at the set's famous cards, discussing financial elements of the set, opening a pack on camera, and giving the set its final verdict. Thanks for watching. This episode is doing something different because it's clear that you guys like it when I go into depth. But it's hard to keep up a weekly schedule, so we're going to try breaking large sets into 2 pieces. That should allow me to keep the depth of detail increasing while still getting you guys episodes on a weekly basis. Small sets will hopefully stay to a single show. Also, if you enjoy the show, I strongly suggest watching Evan Irwin's Forgotten Lore series, which is another Magic history show. He and I are working together on research. I'm still going to keep my series running, but it's nice to collaborate. If you enjoyed this video, hammer on that like button, hit that subscribe if you haven't, and go and check out my older shows. I think that this is a great show, and your feedback on past shows as well as this one will really help me improve. This is Eli Kaplan for Ancestral Recall, signing off. Good games and good luck.